Hello and welcome to the I&D podcast. Today's report is going to be a special one that is somber and serious. What has occurred earlier today has been a Russian offensive against the sovereign nation of Ukraine. Early in the morning, right before dawn, Russian forces executed an offensive against the key cities of the capital of Kyiv, Ukraine's second largest Kharkov, its key port cities of Mariupol and Odessa, as well as other major cities and areas of Ukraine. It has been estimated that so far roughly 40 soldiers have died on the Ukrainian side with no reported casualties from the Russian side. It is unclear, nor is it confirmed that any civilians have died yet. It appears that Russian targets have been legitimate military outposts and bases so far, while Russia claims that it has completely crippled and destroyed Ukraine's air defenses. Ukraine, however, claims that it has taken down several Russian planes. Nonetheless, Ukraine is in a state of national emergency. Its citizens have been urged to stay home, with even in some cities, citizens being urged to pack bags to leave the country. This marks a completely different day and a completely different era in history. Before today, we as a global society have been living in relative peace. Yes, there have been instances of invasions on small and medium-sized countries in the Middle East by Western powers and the United States. There have been wars against terror. There have been wars against guerrilla forces. But what has not occurred is a major war between two nations, especially two major nations. What has not occurred is a war in Europe since the 1990s. And specifically, the last war that Europe has seen was the Yugoslav wars, which ended in 2001. And more notably, it should be stated that those wars primarily ended in 1995. The war that ended in 2001 was primarily occurring in the Albanian parts of Kosovo, who fundamentally people do care less about. Now, what has occurred is a shattering of European peace, and this Russian attack has had effects on the entire world. Global markets, particularly those in Europe and Asia, have crashed, while the Western markets of the United States have also opened on a very slump day. Oil and energy prices have skyrocketed, with Brent crude oil going over $100 a barrel. Western powers are debating introducing major, massive, and crippling sanctions against Russia. These are not only going to hurt Russia, they are going to hurt the entire world. What is anticipating us is an era of conflict and an era of economic difficulty unless this can be resolved. Now, ironically, the invasion and the attack occurred right in the middle of a UN Security Council meeting that was being held as an emergency meeting to prevent any form of aggression against Ukraine. And what is probably going to go down as the most ironic quote in contemporary history, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, before the opening of the meeting, stated to Vladimir Putin and the Russian delegation to give peace a chance. In the middle of this Security Council meeting, Russia began to execute its massive attack against the cities of Ukraine. This is an all-out war, and peace in Europe has been completely shattered. Ukraine and its citizens are staying at home, though trying to fight this threat. It should be noted that it's very difficult to actually tell what's going on in the ground. There are still some journalists in Ukraine who have managed to confirm that missiles have fell on key cities like Kyiv and like Kharkov and Mariupol and Odessa, as well as others. But nonetheless, specific reports cannot be fully confirmed. And most relevantly, how the military situation is and what side is having a strategic advantage cannot be occurred. Both the Ukrainian military and Russian military have made statements on social media that they have both been gaining serious strategic ground and that they have both been winning this conflict. The Ukrainian military has stated that it has not given an ounce of land to Russia, while Russia has stated that it has crippled Ukraine's air defenses and other military bases. Now, it should be noted that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the West to not only introduce massive sanctions against Russia, but to become militarily involved. Now, essentially every single Western power, especially the allies of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, have completely ruled out any form of military intervention. But nonetheless, I'm going to give my own opinion here. The reality is that the sanctions now being introduced against Russia are crippling, and they will be effective, but they are too little, too late. These sanctions should have been introduced before an invasion occurred, not after. The sanctions, and sanctions generally speaking, should be used as a deterrent, not as a punishment. The sanctions now being introduced after the government of Vladimir Putin and the country of Russia have executed the attack on Ukraine are a punishment, and they are not a deterrent. Russia has had months to prepare for these sanctions. And in addition to that, Russia is not the country that it was 10, 15 years ago. Russia has economically developed. In addition to this, allies of Russia, such as the People's Republic of China, have become economic superpowers. Even if there are sanctions levied against Russia, it will have options to find economic productivity outside of the West. Time has come for a light military intervention on the side of Western powers, particularly the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I am not, and I will not, currently, as the situation stands, advocate for boots being sent on the ground. But Ukraine clearly needs assistance in consolidating control over its airspace. Ukraine's airspace has been deemed as a war zone, but the reality is Ukraine has lost control over the air over its country. The reason why is Ukraine's air defense systems, which again, Russia claims it has completely destroyed already within hours of its attack that was executed against Ukraine, are old. They come from the ages of the Soviet Union. The reality is Ukraine will need defense in its air defense and air support. Additionally, the West can afford to send covert operations, special operations, and a small amount of elite soldiers to Ukraine to assist the Ukrainian military in its fight against Russian soldiers. Many people have not wanted to get involved in this conflict whatsoever, especially in the West, because they feel that it has no influence or overbearing on them. But I want to state that Ukraine is a country. Just to give context to my American friends, I think our European viewers already know how big Ukraine is, but Ukraine is the size of Texas. Ukraine is a major supplier and producer of many different resources. It is a crucial country. And more than anything else, Ukraine represents not just a nation, but a stepping stone in Russia's ambitions to rebuild what it felt was its geopolitical sphere of influence during the ages of the Soviet Union. If Ukraine falls, Russia will set its sights on the next country, particularly the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Following this, Russia will set its sights on its historical rival, Poland, and it will begin to move even further and further into Europe if Russia is not stopped. In addition to this, Russian President Vladimir Putin has made unhinged and uncharacteristic threats that fundamentally are not representative of a world leader or a president acting within the margins of rationale or reason. Vladimir Putin has stated that any country that gets involved in this conflict is going to experience destructive consequences like the world has never seen before. This is a clear allusion to Russia's nuclear power. Vladimir Putin has already begun threatening the utilization of nuclear weapons. And this conflict is being felt all over the world. The reality is something needs to be done. And more so, currently speaking, Russia's goals and ambitions of this specific invasion are completely unclear. Vladimir Putin has stated that he has no intention of occupying Ukraine. And the reality is I think I kind of agree with this. Even if he did, Russia would just be faced with an Afghanistan Mujahideen situation from the 1980s. Occupying a nation requires establishing a pro-Russian or pro-great power that is committing the invasion government that is going to be sustainable. And history has shown us from the United States involvement in Afghanistan and Vietnam, and from the Soviet involvement in Afghanistan itself and other countries. Pretty much any great power that gets involved or commits to an occupation or trying to establish some form of stable, pro-great power government is unsuccessful at this. What Vladimir Putin has stated are his goals instead is to demilitarize Ukraine and to denazify the country. Now, why is Vladimir Putin using Nazi rhetoric to describe the government and the nationalists in Ukraine? The reality that needs to be understood is World War II still has a lot of political influence in Europe, specifically Russia. Now, no other country besides Russia lost as many people and soldiers fighting Adolf Hitler in World War II. Nazism is still a political bing word in the country, and many Ukrainians were sympathetic towards the side of Adolf Hitler. Not because they were Nazis or wanted to kill Jews, but because they wanted freedom from the Soviet influence. And it should be stated that the argument of Nazification or Nazism still existing in Ukraine is not relevant. Ukraine has moved forward from this period in its history, and the best exemplifying example of that is its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, who many of you may have noticed based on his last name, Zelensky, is a fucking Jew. Their president is Jewish. It is very clear that this country has moved on from Nazism. And the only interest of the Ukrainian people is to experience freedom and sovereignty. There is no Nazism in Ukraine. But Putin intends to cripple the country. Putin's ambitions are to rebuild what was the power block of the Soviet Union, as well as reconsolidate its geopolitical sphere of interest. Ukraine, while not necessarily a weak nation, Ukraine is a proud country with proud people, and even though it's shaky, a successful democracy. Nonetheless, Ukraine and its military capabilities cannot compare to Russia's. Russia is a significantly more militarily developed, powerful, and executable nation than Ukraine is. And the only way to fight this threat, unless we are planning or Ukraine is planning on resorting to using civilians to fight a bloody and massive casualty guerrilla war against Russia, which would lead to countless deaths. The only powers that can assist in this are Western powers. The world needs to do something, and the world needs to get involved. And that's going to happen quicker when the world realizes that today, when we all woke up, we woke up in a different world. Today, we are in a world where war is occurring in Europe again. And I don't need to give you a history lesson for you to understand that wars in Europe tend to spill over to the entire world. Let me know what you think. Comment on this video, share this video, and do what you can to raise awareness about the situation in Ukraine. I'm going to end by saying this is historically the most important event to occur in world history since the 9/11 Twin Towers attacks. Thank you for tuning in. We will be covering the situation as it develops.